You know, I spend a lot of time thinking about what our future is going to be like and trying to predict it. And one day I realized that we don't need to predict it. We just need to invent it, because it's people who invent the future. And that's how this really works. The best way to predict the future is to invent it. That's an Alan Kay quote. And who are these people, right? Who are these people who do this? Well, they're dreamers. They're people who disagree with the norm. They're people who feel that with just their own labor and their friends and so forth, they can actually solve a real problem. They can invent some new physics. They can discover gravitational waves. They can cure a disease that has bedeviled humans for thousands and thousands of years. Sometimes these people are entrepreneurs, right? So think about Starbucks, SAP, Microsoft, Tesla, Apple, Facebook, Google, Spotify, SoundCloud, King Gaming, BlaBlaCar. People, right? Every one of these companies is new and had a couple of founders who were crazy in a good way, and changed the world, right? With more coming. And so the key question here is, if we want to invent the future, how are we going to organize it? And why do they do it? It's because they actually believe that in making the world a better place. They're not beholden to the traditional cynicism that you'll see sitting at home on the sofa watching television and watching the politicians debate or what have you. They actually believe that they can personally deliver something that is extraordinary. And when I've thought about it a lot, I've been looking at the research on economic growth. Much of the world's growth has actually correlated with empowerment of individuals. That if you go back over 100 years, most of the technologies that have essentially delivered the kind of economic growth that we're all beneficiaries are, have come because societal rules loosened. People could create both companies and jobs and principles and platforms. And the most important story, which is the story in the last 20 years of globalization and taking 2 billion people from dirt poverty, $1 a day or less, to what we would think of as lower middle class, is a huge accomplishment that we're all, I think, very much should be proud of, but to understand that it happened because there were a set of principles. We let the entrepreneurs do their thing. The things that they built essentially empowered individuals, often against the will of the state. Right? And again, using information and the technologies that everybody here in the room cares about. So I think the problem here is, instead of sort of arguing over regulation and this problem and so forth and so on, we're not setting ambitious goals enough. The goals are not strong enough, right? So this is the man in the moon problem, but now we've done that, right? So we need another one. Now we're going to Mars and so forth and so on. But what about here? What about in Europe? What about in the United States? We sort of lost this ability to say, we are going to transformatively solve this problem over here and in this profound way. And I think it's time for us to do that. DeepMind, and you'll hear about this tomorrow when Demis speaks, decided that they did an interesting analysis. There's an injury called acute kidney injury. 40,000 British citizens die of it every year, and 30% of them appear to be preventable, right? So you want a problem? That's a problem, especially if you're the one in the hospital, right? We believe, and we have good evidence, and you'll hear tomorrow, that that one can actually be fixed, at least 30% of it. Now that's a revolution. That's why we do what we do. The US government, for example, is pushing under the vice president, a cancer moonshot, that somehow technology, science, and money gets to the point where a real breakthrough is capable. President Obama has pushed one around the brain. Yuri Milner, you'll hear tomorrow. I mean, talk about crazy idea, right? We're going to send something to Alpha Centauri at 20% the speed of light. Now, that's a bold vision. That's literally more than a moonshot. We need tens of these, and 20 and 30 and 40 and so forth, to both unify all the people around us and some of the great inventors that we have here. And again, Britain is full of these sorts of people. Sean Parker, by the way, just donated $250 million because of advances in a particular form of cancer, various forms of inflammation and so forth, the new discoveries. And there's a consensus that with a targeted funding goal, with a whole bunch of lab work, we can make breakthroughs which will change humanity for the next thousands of years. This one had to do with engineering white blood cells in a new way. So it seems to me that there are 4 or 5 or 6 areas where this phenomenon is going to happen now. The first one I'm going to call it nerds over cattle. So as much as we like cows are sort of problematic, especially if you think about global warming. There's evidence that climate change, global warming, 15% or so of the CO2 CO2 comes from the aspects of having lots of cows and doing the things we do to cows. Imagine a situation, there are breakthroughs now where we can actually manufacture meat and meat substitutes, cheese, so forth and so on, from plants. And synthetic food production from the vast databases of organic compounds and molecules and proteins may now be possible to get highly tasty, very much substitutable foods for things which we have used for years. Now, do you think that that matters? Yeah, it turns out it does. Not only in terms of reducing the cost of food, which is still an issue in many parts of the developing world, but also for land use. And again, if you care about the land and you care about water use and all those pesticides and so forth, the breakthroughs there are right there to get it. I'll give you another one. 3D printing of buildings. There's a lot of people who believe that we can now manufacture 3D devices, or things, if you will, more than the nanoscale. Now, does that matter? Well, there's not that much new construction in Europe and in Britain in general, but there's a great deal of housing needs around the world, and especially in the developing world. Can you imagine if you could not only build the house in a week, but also do your remodel and recycle all the materials, right, and get it that quickly? We've never had that ability. It's always been a tradecraft model, and we all love this, and the banging of the hammers and so forth and so on. But what if we could do it systematically? What if we could automate all of it? Again, entrepreneurs, companies, dreamers trying to do this. Who benefits? Everybody. There's a great deal of interest in virtual reality. Last week, Google announced a large number of products in our Google I/O product. But the platform that we announced in virtual reality was particularly effective because it's a platform where you put three-dimensional images, you can see them on three-dimensional glasses, but they're also annotated and they use augmented reality. So literally, not only do you take the pictures in 3 dimensions, but we also have knowledge about what's in the picture, and then you can navigate it and so forth. Where will this go? We don't know. What we know is that the first users will be gamers, right? Because gamers spend a lot of time and they're obsessive. And if you spend any time with, especially teenagers who are in the gaming community, it's a life and it's a passion and so forth. We know the business is there. We know the money is there. We know the industries will be formed. But what happens when all the photographs that you've assembled have that three-dimensional assembly? What happens when they have a time component? What happens when they have a historical component? What happens when they're augmented? It's a much richer environment. Does it matter? Of course it does, for you as an individual, but also for storytelling and all the other things that people care about. And remember, that comes with voice activation. So all of a sudden, when you say something, the device, the information can react back in a really clever way. So I love this kind of stuff. There's a tremendous explosion that's going to happen in medicine. And we talked a little bit about this already today, part of why we have the agenda that you've seen. And there's lots of ways to describe the sum of it all. But I like to think of it as the digital world has finally met the analog world, right? And it's finally now possible to apply the scalable computer science techniques which built our company. Many of you participated in this in different ways. There's now a way to do this that's really, really profound. Let's start with your phone, right? Impossibly good health monitoring through your phone. And most people have stopped wearing watches because your phone has a pretty good clock on it. But instead, you'll start wearing a different kind of watch or a decorative watch, but it'll be a health monitoring system. And the watch will call your phone, which will call the doctor, who will then call you back. And eventually, you'll learn that it's faster just to have the phone call you and say, get yourself to the hospital. But the important thing is that this dynamic monitoring is now possible, and these are now coming throughout the industry to watch very subtle biological changes in our bodies. And there are breakthroughs now in nanotechnology where, I'll give you an example, if you take a pill, nanoparticles get in your body and they can check for early detection of cancer. If you've lost a loved one to cancer, you understand how important early detection, and we can detect cancer far earlier than any other test through these mechanisms. Where are these products? They're in the various approval cycles, but in our lifetimes, you'll be wearing a watch that will keep you alive. And by the way, that watch will talk to your smartphone, right? And of course, an impossibly faster smartphone. That's an easy one. Imaging and radiology are essentially a solved problem. So everybody here goes to the doctor, and you go to the dermatologist, right? Dermatologist looks around and says, oh, good. You don't have any cancer, and that's kind of ugly, but it's always been ugly, and I know it just bothers them. That's a really bad way to get diagnosed for something as important as melanoma. What I want is I want the dermatologist to have a camera, and I want a picture taken, and I want an immediate answer as to whether this is a problem or not, and I want then the dermatologist to say, you're fine or you're not. Why should I trust a human when computer vision is better? So you sit there and say, really? Okay, I'll give you a statistic. There's a disease called basically diabetic retinopathy. And what happens if you have diabetes, and in the world, China is has the leading objective of having most people with diabetes. 51% of Chinese citizens are pre-diabetics. It's a horrendous disease. And if it goes along far enough, the back part of your eyes, the little part of your retina that has blood vessels changes its shape. It can be spotted by an excellent ophthalmologist. If you don't treat it fairly quickly, you lose your eyesight. So we built a prototype last year, which looks at people's eyes, which there are lots of pictures of, and we can diagnose it more accurately 99% of the time than the best ophthalmologist to do it at 90%. How is that? I mean, are we geniuses? No, by the way. We see more eyes. Our computer saw 1 million eyes. Not even the best ophthalmologist can see that many eyes. So there's plenty of situations, especially in medicine, where the breakthrough in computer vision means, in this case, much better diagnostics. What about radiology? What about lung scans and all the other things? Everyone here's had these, right? So in the future, all of that stuff will be digitized. It'll all run through a computer, and then your physician will get that information. So that's routine stuff. Now, it's not routine if you're ill. But the really amazing stuff is what's happening with CRISPR and gene editing. And we talked a little bit about this already. CRISPR-Cas9, probably the most significant invention in biology in the last 50 years. And again, due to people who were curious looking at an unused part of the human genome, means that we can begin to assemble and essentially disassemble and reassemble genetic sequences. It turns out it's pretty rough right now. Most of the assemblies and disassemblies don't work, and so it's sort of brute force through the system. But that technology is getting better pretty rapidly. And what it means is that you can begin to turn on and off the cancer driver genes, right? Do you care about this? Yes, you do. Especially since a database is now being built of traditional biologic versus cancerous biologic with the putative solution and what to do. Boom, computer tells you the answer, there you go. It's probable, many of the scientists I've talked to believe that in the next 10 years, certain diseases that are particularly amenable to this can in fact be solved. Sickle cell anemia, various forms of breast and lung cancers, and colorectal cancers, right? Now, the number of people worldwide who are affected by this is so large that these are breakthroughs of a scale that dwarf what Google and the rest of us have been able to do. So the prize, by the way, is saving lives and saving money at the same time. And the beauty of these systems is that as they get more automated, they become more efficient. And in the digital world, what happened was we were in a declining cost industry, whereas many other industries were in increasing cost industries because they're largely service-based. But with these tools, as we get more data, they get more efficient. The quality is better. And as we know, prevention is the best way to avoid expense. So it's a twofer, right, in the many things people are worried about. Now, I mentioned this image thing. And I'm convinced the correct claim, the goal we should set is, let's accelerate the adoption of self-driving cars. Because what? Because Google's involved in this? No, because it's saving lives. I'll give you the number in the US. There are 32,800 people scheduled to die in the US this year. We just don't know who on the highways. I'm sorry to be so brutal. Think of the number. The analogous numbers in Europe, by the way, are lower. Right? It's for some whatever. And the number in the US is the lowest per mile it's ever been. So everyone says, oh, that's great. Only 32,000 people are going to die. That's horrific. And yet with the breakthroughs that we've had with vision, and for the reasons that I described, you can now build cars that both have eyes in the front and eyes in the back. And not a single one of you has eyes back and forward on your head. It just doesn't exist. So the fact of the matter is that a national priority, in fact a global priority, And so how many lives is that globally? It's about 1.3 million people. Right, and every one of those, often young people, every one of those is a funeral, a life interrupted, and so forth. Now, what happens? Well, why do we have these today? The technology works. Well, so-and-so is going to get it done in 5 years. So-and-so is going to get it done in 3 years. So hundreds of thousands of lives in the US, tens of thousands of lives in Europe will be lost at a time when we could easily accelerate that. And there are all sorts of approaches to it, but the fact of the matter is it should be a very, very high priority. I'll give you another example. In education, we just have another breakthrough in understanding how people learn. There's a great deal of evidence that you need a teacher. All this stuff about distance learning, and I'm going to sit there in front of the computer, I'm going to learn. Well, maybe that's somebody else, but I'm not that motivated, trust me. Right? The average child in particular needs a teacher. But we now have evidence that you can design personalized lesson plans that work based on that particular students. And teachers are learning how to assemble group classrooms where each student is following a different plan. And I think that this is transformative as the self-driving cars and the manufacturing and so forth that I mentioned. That's, I think, how powerful that is. And I can go into that if you're interested in it. But education, which has been one of the most change-resistant parts of the world, right, for all sorts of reasons, whether it's culture or regulation or unions or what have you, whatever group and whatever reason you believe is about to be amenable to the same digitization principle based on real demonstrated learning and customization and empowerment. Again, driven by teachers, because teachers care about their students. But I think that perhaps the most important thing that will happen, and where I think we should spend most of our time, is in the question of making us smarter. I'm going to use the phrase AI assistance for everybody, right? That, can you imagine if we just set out a goal of making every human being smarter? And I mean smarter meaning more intelligent, more knowledgeable, quicker, more comedic, however you define intelligence. Right? Whatever your definition, more verbal, more nonverbal, better at solving problems, better at solving math. How can we do this? Well, we've had breakthroughs now where we're beginning to understand at least certain forms of intuition, how intuition works, and certain forms of creativity. Now, I'm not talking about robots here, and I'm not talking about replacing humans. I'm talking about making them smarter. I'll give you an example. What do chemists actually do? So I talked to some chemists. What do you actually do? Well, think of it this way. They wake up in the morning, and they had a dream, and they had organic model A, combined with protein B and organic molecule C, when combined, will make a new substance that will cause a new factory to get built, and my firm will make $1 billion, and I'll get a huge bonus. That's what a chemist does, roughly speaking. Now, how do they know which combination? It's called intuition. And by the way, it never works. So they try that in the afternoon, they test it, it doesn't work. So they go to sleep, they wake up the next morning, they have a new idea, molecule B, so forth and so on, off they go. It's intuition. Well, that process can be assisted by computers. So computers can actually look at the combination of chemistry and score the likelihood of that. Now, does this matter? Yeah. How big is the chemical industry in Europe? Many hundreds of billions of dollars of revenue. What chemicals? The chemicals that you use to clean your house, right? New organic, non-polluting chemicals, chemicals that are used to clean things, plastics, all of those kinds of things. I'll give you another example. What about energy? We have some evidence that if you take one of these models and you apply it to an existing energy distribution center system, you can save 10 to 20%. How? The smartest people have actually already tried to do this, but they've never been able to build models that deal with complex adaptive systems. In other words, all the traditional schools we went to and all of that basically say that this is how a system works statically, but that's not how life works. Life has a time series to it. It changes, the system adapts, right? And these systems are capable of learning within the context. This is a specific kind of learning around things that change, and they keep optimizing, in this case, for both efficiency of cost as well as lack of pollution. It's really about these complex evolutionary systems. And the key here is adaptability and flexibility. So think of it as games where the rules keep changing and the score keeps changing. And we are used to that, right? We're hugely attuned to how these systems work as human beings. And now we're beginning to do this. So I'll finish up by sort of saying that I think we are we're beginning on a quest that's a much bigger quest than it sounds. I'll pick protein folding. Proteins are, if you know a little bit about the science, what happens is these proteins wander around and they fold in odd ways on top of molecules, and it matters a great deal in much of biology and much of chemistry and so forth and so on. If we could do proper protein folding, which has been eluded us for so long, we could accelerate the discovery of new chemicals, new proteins, new solutions, new drugs, and new things that matter. These problems are right at the edge of what we can discover. And my own view is in the next 5 years or so forth, this merger of the analog and the digital world and the underlying gains that we're beginning to see. And I'll end by saying that we have an early proof point that this works. The game of Go, which is very popular in Asia, we had no idea whether our team here in London could actually pull it off, but we all went to Korea anyway. And indeed, we won 4 out of 5 games against the top player in the world in a game that was thought to be incomputable. So my message here is, first, we're not setting high enough goals as a society. We're not saying, is there a better solution? Is it possible if we put our heads together? And I've suggested that there are 4 or 5 areas where I'm quite sure that we could set these goals and we could make a huge difference. So with that, thank you very, very much.